welcome to episode 4 of Picky Bastards. It's been a while since the last one, so I'll just run through the premise again. So each month we get together and almost come to blows while discussing 4 recently released albums and 1 classic that none of us know. Then we act a little bit nicer to each other when one of us introduces an act that we love. So this month's recent albums are Drunk by Thundercat, Rocket by Sandy Alex G, Sylvan Esso's What Now, and No Shape by Perfume Genius. The classic is a hip-hop album from 2004, Madvillain by Madvillain. And then I'll be introducing you all to the National. So I'm going to start with some questions that are actually kind of based on the National because I'm such a geek about them. And a lot of people tell us that the National are a band that really grows on you, so you learn to love them the more you listen to them. So I want to start by asking Nirmal, which of the 5 albums grew on him the most?
Yeah, so the one that I kept coming back to over and over again, and even though I didn't really care for it at the beginning, was the first one, actually, the Madvillain one, Madvillainy. When I first listened to it, I was pretty turned off by the interjection of these. I don't know. Well, I don't know what you'd call them. You'd call them like pop or 60s era like narrations about the state of a superhero or villains and such, something like that. And I kept getting irritated by that, but then I kept coming back to it, and I was like, oh, okay, I see. I'm beginning to understand how this kind of works together with the hip hop. So I kind of like that.
Right. Okay. Well, Madvillain. Yeah. Just to give a bit of context on Madvillain, then it's sort of a hugely respected album. It was voted in the top 50 of all time by Pitchfork readers, for example. So it's a pretty huge album, and I know that I know fans have been waiting for like a follow-up for a long time. But for me, it was another one of our classic albums, which seems to be a theme with the classic albums for me.
Yeah.
That I think I would have loved when it came out. It was kind of the music I was listening to around that era, but.
Right, when it came out again? What year was it come out?
2004.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but now I think maybe it's a little bit, and it comes into what you just said, Nirmal, about the weird sort of interjections. It's a little bit too of its time to really do it for me, I think. There's something that's dated it even in sort of 13 years. But I did think it was a good album, and I like how it's sort of a collection of short songs. It's nothing, but then that in a way made nothing really stand out to me that much, other than maybe the track Figaro, which really stood out to me on the album. It's like quite dark and gloomy beat, but really sort of pulls you in. But then other than that, as the whole album, I found it didn't, nothing stood out to me, and I kind of the opposite to you, Nirmal, stopped listening to it quite early, just because it wasn't grabbing me.
Yeah, I think. I'm going to give it Fran this time, and generally speaking, I think you took the words out of my mouth really about the fact that it sounds a little bit dated. I actually find it quite interesting with newer genres how fast things become dated, you know. In fact, I was listening to Needle Drop that I'm a pretty religious follower of in the last few weeks, and he was talking about one particular genre, I can't remember which genre it was now, where he was saying it's dated from 18 months ago, which I thought was a pretty extreme example of that, and maybe he's wrong, but still, that kind of concept of that amount of time making a huge change to the genre is really interesting to me, you know. So, and I think this is a good example of it. So, although I was not really into this genre at that point in my life, maybe had I been open to that a little bit, this album would have felt more fresh. But it just felt a little bit. A little bit tired, to be honest, although I realise I can see why it's very skillful, though, so I'm not trying to dismiss, the overarching ability of the album to sort of produce clever stuff, but it didn't really grab me, and I have to say it's the hardest one of these 6 for me to actually talk about, in a sense, because I just feel like I'm a little bit, it's a bit of a blank slate compared to the other ones. So can you see what we're saying, Nirmal, or does that sound totally off base?
I don't know. I mean, I can definitely see that, and I think I had that feeling. But I think that goes to that question of which one grew on you. And I think, Fran, you really haven't given it enough time. And I would say, Nick, you were so quick to dismiss this album that you are not acting in good faith with the project.
Wow.
Which is to stick with something long enough in order for it to have some kind of growth. So whatever your impressions were at the beginning, if they're the same at the end, you just haven't done your job.
I'm going to stand up for myself a little bit there and say, I mean, when I say I didn't listen to it for long, I think I listened to the album at least 15 times.
I mean, I didn't even specify how many times I listened to it. So your assumption that I didn't listen to it much is pretty out of order, frankly. This album was on repeat as I slept through the night for multiple days.
I've even got a tattoo of his face on my back now. I listen to.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. I actually know him. We're personal friends, so we hang out all the time.
I did give it a good go though, and I think I gave it a good go mainly because, as someone who used to be really into hip hop, I saw how big it was and how much of a classic it is. Yeah. And I think it was number 37 in Pitchfork's best albums of all time. Which I'm not saying Pitchfork's the go-to. Yeah. For this, but it's a
heavyweight list, I suppose. Yeah.
Magazine. So I was really kind of, I wanted to really like it, which is why I chose it. I want to say this was my pick. So yeah, I wanted to really like it. I've meant to listen to it for a while, but it just, I don't know. Maybe I should have given it another 15 listens, Nirmal. I don't know.
I'm glad we're not in a situation where the ones we pick are the ones we automatically feel we need to defend, because I don't think that's healthy. And we don't know them anyway.
You pick something because you think you will like it.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
And I think this is actually the first time that we've had to gang up on Nirmal, actually. So
yeah. And that's also the first time that Nirmal's been quite that patronising to us. Yeah, it's a whole new level of patronising, which I've witnessed for many years, but
I'm kind of all right with that though.
Oh yeah, yeah. You find it amusing, but you haven't had a decade of it like I have.
I think the narratives started to be almost comical and hilarious in relation to what's happening politically right now, and so I was listening to it, and I was just feeling like, what I need now is a villain that I can believe in. This is the guy, and I started believing it. I liked it.
Okay.
I mean, I think it is meant to be quite a comical album, and I think actually, I think the idea actually coming into talking about modern, I think some of the recent hip hop albums we've listened to, like Odyssey and stuff, are so political and so in this moment that maybe that's part of what dates this so much, is that a lot of the hip hop we've been listening to as a group is very now. Yeah. And this isn't, so maybe that's part of the struggle to get into it. I don't know.
What Nirmal's basically arguing, which is that it's so topical, is completely incorrect, is what you're basically saying, just to clarify, just to make that more... Yeah.
Just a failure of the imagination, really.
Right.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay.
No, I don't know what to say more than that, really. I feel like it's a little bit less to say than other ones where I'm more invested, honestly.
Well, shall we?
Which is one of the reasons I was a bit concerned about it, because I wasn't too invested. Yeah. Do you want? Yeah,
I have a question for you now, Nick.
I'm happy to answer the question about the grower as well, though, if you wish. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I was going to go for a different question, which I hope you prepared an answer for now that I've asked you, because if you've not, then we may be in trouble.
Well, we'll see, won't we?
But so another thing about the National, I've tried to theme the questions a little bit around them this time. So I wanted to ask Nick, because the lyrics in the National are what make me really love them. I wanted to ask Nick which was the most lyrically interesting album to him.
And this is not to include the National in that.
Yeah, not to include the National. Oh. I did run these questions by us, but it's a while back. So.
I did. I'll say, oddly, although I'm not saying this in the context of absolutely loving the album, but I'll say that the Sylvan Esso actually had some pretty interestingly spun lyrics. I'm not going to pull them to mind at this minute, but I thought it had some clever ways of rendering things to do with a lot of the album's themes, which were largely to do with, I felt like largely to do with the kind of energy and joy that couple, that they are a couple, by the way. They actually recently got married. In fact, I think the cover of the album is actually a picture of them embracing or something after on their wedding day. So, so I thought the kind of joy in that was quite well represented in the lyrics, and I suppose that was quite an interesting example. I'm not saying though that it was my favourite album of the set, and this is not to include the National in any of this conversation right now, but of the others, it wasn't my favourite of the set. I was a big fan of the first album by this band. I don't know if either of you come across it. Have you?
No, I'd never heard of them until you put them on this list.
No. Well, did you know the first one?
No, I did not.
Okay. Well, I kind of knew it because we have a vague connection to one of the members of the band through a friend of a friend.
And that's the same as your connection to Madvillain.
Yeah, we're best mates,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, we hang out, as I said, yeah. He's round my house now, she's just in the living room. I'll go and get him, yeah.
Okay.
So the Sylvan Esso, I had this investment in the first album, and as a result, I can't say I was objective going into it. I was hoping very much that it would be as good as the first one, and I don't think it was. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think ultimately it's a two-piece band that does kind of smooth electronica with a really kind of sultry vocal over it. She's a very good singer, I think. She's an intelligent songwriter. As I said, the lyrics are good, and I don't dislike really necessarily anything in the electronics of it, but I thought some of these songs were just too throwaway pop almost for me, just for my personal taste. It was hard for me to get on board with some of the songs. There was one of the examples was, well, probably the worst one of the album was the one called Song, I thought, which was one that sort of flagged the fact that it was irritating in its own lyrics, which I thought was quite staggering, to actually have a song that says this is the song that you're not going to be able to forget because it's such a repetitive song. Called Song, and I was just like, Jesus, you really got to try and rein it in with that, you know. It's just too much,
didn't it?
Oh yeah, no,
I don't think you would have found it irritating if them, but I think they put that in your head. You know, you probably would have loved it, but it's.
I don't think so.
It messed with your head, mate.
It was a thinner sort of beat. There was a couple of good things on it. There was a really good sort of. I don't know exactly what I could hear. It sounded like a granular delay or something on the vocals, on the beat in the choruses, which was really interesting on that song even. And that was the weakest song on the album, I thought. But some of the elements of the song were just a little bit too crowd pleasing pop for me, just for my personal taste. I think it'll go down well in general, and I think there are some really good high points on it. And there's also some really out of place tracks, which I really liked. Like Slackjaw was one of the songs, which is a very delicate. She did a couple of songs like this on the last album as well. Very, very delicate, kind of subtle, almost old style blues track from the 40s or something, 40s or 50s or something. So, but very, very stripped away. So that was great, even though it was a little bit out of place with some of the other songs. But I think overall the best thing about the album, though, if I sort of end on that, is I think it really did represent the joy a lot in their relationship, which I see. If you ever see a performance of them, they've just seemed to be extremely happy to be together on stage doing that, performing that music, and especially the guy out of the band. I don't know their names, I'm afraid. The guy out of the band is really just loving every moment of the experience, and that comes through, I think, quite a bit. So that's my say on the Sylvan Esso one. What do you think, Nirmal?
Maybe my response to the Sylvan Esso was your assessment of its pop elements kind of explain why I felt like it was very placid and digestible and background to what.
And that's a criticism, I assume, is it?
For me, that's a criticism. Yeah.
Okay.
It didn't pique my attention, and I think that's from what you're saying, and I think that's fairly accurate. Is that the moments of it just seemed to glide away from me as I was listening to it. So there's just nothing I could hang on to, and
Okay.
I'm reminded of this quote that I heard from listening to The Moth one day, which was the storytelling show, which was you either have a good time or you have a good story to tell. You can't have both. So
right.
It's like the joy and stuff like that. That's fantastic. It's really great. But I'm personally I'm kind of bored by all of that. Just sort of like, you had a great wedding.
Let's just be clear. Nirmal just stated that he's bored by joy. That's really a remarkable statement.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of joy in your life, mate.
Who isn't captured by the feelings of disconnection and alienation and sadness and seeing the beauty out of that, right? As opposed to, hey, this is a great happy marriage and and I'm going to sing about the happiness of it. I mean, come on now.
Well, yeah.
Fair enough.
I will say, by the way, before Fran talks, just to say that the previous album I really recommend to people. I think it was actually just called Sylvan Esso, possibly, but it's their only other album, and it has some really good stuff, and also a little bit more varied topics, I think, across the range of the album. So anyway, by cutting, Fran, go ahead.
Well, first of all, Nirmal, I'd like to say that I don't think you gave this album enough of a chance. I think you should listen to it a few more times. So, go back and listen to it again.
Thought there.
But also, if I was answering my first question to Nirmal about which one grew on me the most, I'd say this album. If I was answering my second question to Nick about which one had the best lyrics, the most interesting lyrics, I'd also say this album. And if I was saying which one I thought was my favourite of the albums, I would say this album.
Okay, wow. I'm really surprised, I got to say.
It started off as an album that I felt...
You just want to ask yourself and respond to your own questions.
More questions. I can do that if you want. You might get bored.
It's the Fran show.
But yeah, I mean, it really did grow on me, though. It was an album that I actually felt a little bit like you at first, Nirmal, that it was a bit backgroundy. But the more I listened to it, I found it really interesting, and I don't think it was kind of stuck in one theme. I think maybe it is a little bit, the second song, Die Young, which was one of my favourites, maybe that is a little bit about the marriage and everything, but they make it really interesting. I mean, the lyric, I was going to die young, now I've got to wait for you, hon. It's a much more original way of talking about a relationship that you're very happy in. And I found some of it quite dark in the album as well, like the song Radio, which I thought was kind of a song about like our internet obsessed society and always staring at screens, and there's lyrics about TV queens and faking the truth in a new pop song, and I found them really interesting. But then also I found the album was like the music's very joyful, but actually I felt like listening to the lyrics a bit more, there was some really interesting, relevant themes to the times. I didn't find it was kind of one dimensional. So again, I think maybe there's a deeper something under the surface than just that quite joyful sound.
And it's certainly true. And I know I'm harkening on an album you haven't heard, either of you, but that first album has some songs on it. There's one I think called Wolf, which is a really interesting example of what you're talking about here, Fran, in terms of being a very dark song that sounds very placid and pleasant and clean. As all their songs sound very clean, really. Yeah. But yeah, that sort of implies what you're talking about with this new album as well, I think.
So I think it's there. I think there is a lot of it is just joyful, but I think there is a darkness to them, and there's quite a lot of sarcasm to them, and so I think maybe the surface of it just being really happy is kind of, if you go a bit deeper. Not that I'm saying you didn't go deep, either of you. I'm not judging you, but.
Judge Nirmal, come on.
Well, yeah, I'll judge Nirmal.
I feel like you're judging me, and I wish you would dig deeper into my thoughts.
Well, I'll try. But yeah, is that it for Sylvan Esso?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'm going to suggest
you've got a favourite then.
That we go on to.
More, I guess.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, how many times do you listen to it, Nirmal?
I listen to it so many times, I lose count.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to suggest, just because I'd like to get it out of the way then, that we go on to Drunk by Thundercat next.
Okay.
Nirmal, do you want to get us started?
My second favourite album of this list
is one other than Thundercat's Drunk.
Is Drunk. This was the funniest album I've heard in a long time. And
I might go with that, but maybe different reasons.
Probably the cleverest little juxtapositions of sound and speech. So I was riveted by how self-deprecating he was and how attached to very standard kind of joys that we all have, but undercuts them all the time with an image of command. And so I thought it was, in general, I just thought it was hilarious. I was totally enjoyed this album, and I think I was also taken by the fact that each song seemed to be like 2 minutes or less. It started before it even got started, which was kind of unusual and again, fun.
Have you ever seen him perform? I mean, on YouTube or anything?
No.
See,
You
I've
should
seen
look
him
that up.
perform, which was why I was quite excited about hearing this album, because I've seen him on Jules Holland.
I've seen him a
on
few videos as well.
and he's really interesting to watch. But listening to the album, I kind of felt like I was listening to a bunch of jingles a lot of the time, and then other times I felt like I was listening to the soundtrack of one of those awful teen movies where loads of teenagers try to have sex with women who look 10 years older than them, but are supposed to be the same age. Drink That and Captain Stupid are examples of it. Lyrics like "beat your meat, go to sleep." I feel bad now saying this, but I've made a bullet point here, Nirmal, and I'm sorry, but I'd written "felt like the most juvenile humour imaginable."
Wow.
So yeah, I mean the album just felt completely devoid of emotion and intrigue for me, and also stupidly long for an album that just had
nothing
for me
to say.
nothing. So I'm sorry again, Nirmal. There was a couple of times. There's a track called "Them Changes" and "Where I'm Going" where he gets a little bit more serious, and it showed his potential, but it just wasn't often enough in my eyes. So yeah, sorry, Nirmal. I feel guilty about that, but
I wouldn't feel too bad. So I want to speak about a different aspect. A different.
Take it for what it is. I mean, gosh, you got to impose the values of some sort of
Quality.
Quality of I don't know. Just I don't know. Lost for words.
I as is he apparently. I wanted to sort of talk about a different aspect of it a little bit, really. I mean, first of all, I just wanted to backtrack slightly and say, I don't know if you're aware, Nirmal, but he had a big role in To Pimp a Butterfly and various other major releases of the last number of years. Do you know that?
No, I did not.
Yeah, so he's a massive producer as well, isn't he? And he's done a hell of a lot of production stuff, and I personally think Pimp a Butterfly is an incredible album, and I can see almost from listening to this album that I don't know for certain, but I can imagine I see the stamp of the kind of work that he does in the polish, in the kind of orchestration and that kind of stuff that works in these songs in a similar way to Pimp a Butterfly. So that's a good sign for me, And also, if you do see him on say, Glastonbury or something, you've really got to just watch him play, because I don't think I possibly have ever seen a better technical bass player than this guy. He's absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, and I want to say, I do think he's
six-string bass. He's absolutely flying throughout. I mean, it's just an incredible thing to behold. There's a big but though, really, for me, which is a big sort of downside to this, which is a lot of it seems to me, musically speaking, is incredibly self-indulgent in terms of there's no control or limits on the kind of songwriting that he produces from the standpoint of his instrument. He plays a lot of very, very overly complicated, overly intricate things. He's like the Whitney Houston of bass, I feel like. He just seems desperate to play 30 notes when he could play, 3. And again, that's technically very impressive. But as I often say when I speak to my brother, who's actually a good musician, with great power comes great responsibility with this. You can't
like
just
Spider-Man.
be... Yeah, exactly, Spider-Man, yeah. You can't just drop into every single possible note you're capable of playing just because it's there. You need to think about what the choices are you make and show some control. And it's control that I think that marks... a good songwriter from a great one, So I also wanted to mention Show You the Way, which I saw a performance of on an American TV show on YouTube. He does the song with Michael McDonald and Kenny Loggins. To me, this was like an absolute road accident of a song. I mean, it was just horrific. The problem was, I thought it was just... It was just an attempt to make the uncool cool, like desperately. It was just an attempt to turn. It was in a way, it was an incredibly hipster thing to do. In a way, it was just sort of like, let's find some really, really cheesy options for collaborators here and slam them into the song. And I'm just going to insist that they're cool, and you're going to believe it because I'm Thundercat, and therefore it's bound to be true. So. That was the worst song on the album for me, and he did a performance with both of those people. I think it might have been on Colbert or one of them. Anyway, it's worth checking out that because it's just ridiculous. I thought totally ridiculous. So yeah, I'm not really as critical of the lyrical stuff. I don't mean that I disliked it much, but I don't care as much about that as I do about the musical side of it, which is a big problem for me. So yeah, that's the Thundercat for me, I'm afraid.
Any comeback, Nirmal, or do you want to move on?
I just think that, I like to take the music at its face value and to see what it's done, because, every artist deserves a fair shake, and does not have to get beholden to their entire persona, to be considered valuable. And
I suppose the problem with that is that the whole point of this is for us to exercise our critical judgment about it. So if anything is acceptable, then we should just go home.
Anything is acceptable, and we are home.
Well, that is true.
I can't argue with that. That is.
Well, I'm not actually.
I'm absolutely. Yeah, you've.
So I can carry on.
To rights on that.
Carry on abusing Thundercat because I'm not at home.
Yeah, Fran's in my home, so yeah, that doesn't count. Oh well. All right. So should we move on?
Yeah, Nick, what would you like to go to? Sandy Alex G or Perfume Genius?
Let's talk about the Sandy Alex G first. And Fran, you haven't gone first, and I think you go for it.
Okay. Well, it's my week to be pretty negative about a lot of the stuff on this playlist. I didn't hate this. It was kind of pleasurable to listen to at times, but it didn't really blow me away or suck me in particularly. It was kind of made me shrug my shoulders a little bit. I kind of preferred some of the more folky tracks, and he did try to go a little bit experimental sometimes, but I wasn't really sure what the album was. I don't know. I know that doesn't matter, like what genre it is. I know that's not a big deal, but for me, I just was never.
No, but the
quite sure
coherence of the album, I think, is a meaningful way to assess it. I would agree with that.
I found it quite incoherent, and yeah, when I preferred tracks such as Poison Root and Powerful Man, the more folky ones, I then found his voice a little bit of a problem. Only a little bit, but it was a little bit too. Like I say, I can't sit here and say I really dislike this album in the same way. I can say that about the Thundercat, but there's nothing for me to write home about it either.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really all I have to say.
I'll jump in then. I thought I see what you're saying. I think it wasn't a terribly coherent effort, but in a way, to be in its defence, I think it's a little bit of a collage type album and a little bit of a Sebadoh type album as well in terms of the lo-fi songs like Poison Root, and there was one I wrote down, Brick, that I thought were sort of Sebadoh in style in terms of production, early Sebadoh, kind of rough, a little bit incoherent, but almost intentionally so, if that makes sense, if that's possible. So that was kind of interesting to me, but I mean I don't know where I sort of sit on that in the end. I don't know how I feel about the notion of it being incoherent, but maybe happy to be so. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. I can't kind of resolve that.
I don't think
really.
It was an accident, and I don't think he'd really say that he wasn't trying to be incoherent. But I just think you kind of, I don't know. It only works if it's then absolutely brilliant, I think, to be a bit incoherent. And that's what I struggled with a little bit. But
yeah. I mean, I would say, for example, going way back into a different genre, the Blood Orange album we looked at a long time ago, and even the Solange album, maybe it's a little bit collagey as well. They have a lot of different elements in them, and a lot of different genres in them and stuff. But you got a stamp of control over that, and this felt more slammed together. This felt more thrown together. There was some Elliott Smith stuff. I thought it was a little bit derivative sometimes with that Elliott Smith tone. There was one song, Big Fish, which had very much low sort of murmuring vocals, which was very much like the early Elliott Smith stuff, which I do like, but again, it didn't feel like I could have got anything more than if I'd just gone back to Elliott Smith on some occasions. The best track I had down was Judge, which had these sort of low harmonies and kind of a mellow kind of groove to it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it's a interesting exercise, and I would probably go back to him and hear another one and see what he came up with. But I don't know if this is the one I would go back to necessarily. I might try and explore a little bit more of where he's going or see what the next one's like. But this one itself was, not fantastic to me. It was okay. It was okay.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really stuck after my first few listens with it, and I tended to skip the album to the next one, and so like I don't know, I thought again, to say what Nick is saying, is Elliott Smith seemed to be a massive influence here, and I didn't spend a lot of time looking at his background, but it seems like he was very influenced by Elliott Smith in his songwriting. So I liked the the darkness and kind of the melancholy of it, but I didn't. You know, I thought it was a slightly more engaging in my end than Sylvan Esso, but I thought that was a better for me. It was a better comparison to look at Sylvan Esso in relation to this, and I thought
really
there was a little bit more. Yeah, it kept my interest a little bit more than Sylvan Esso.
Because production, because it's miserable. He's saying, yeah, but I mean, production-wise, it couldn't be more different, could it?
Mm.
I mean, and maybe that's what you're saying, I suppose, that you don't like that polished production as much. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they are quite a good point of comparison because they are very different, aren't they? But
yeah. I'm not sure though, because I just feel like the goals are so massively different, and I don't know how well it fits. But I think I see what you're saying though. I mean, you know, Sylvan Esso is incredibly smooth. It's incredibly sort of rounded. You know. And I mean, round around the edges of the melodies and stuff, you know, whereas this is a bit more jarring, you know, and I suppose that could be more interesting in some respects. So that leaves Perfume Genius.
It does.
I want to go last with this.
Well, I feel like I'll start then because I think my opinion is going to be different to you two.
Okay.
Even before we start, because
sure.
I know you two. I was quite a big fan. I was quite a big fan of the previous Perfume Genius album. So far in our Picky Bastards history, I'm sorry guys, but I've never been so disappointed with an album that we've listened to. It was just so dramatic. I just found it so over the top, and I liked the last album a lot, the previous one. But this felt like, I'm going to use a soundtrack again for the second time in one show, but it felt like the soundtrack to a musical that I did not want to see. The song Reef is the worst culprit for me in that way. I mean, I was almost picturing him dancing around hills with Julie Andrews at one point. It was. I found it quite...
Have you seen the video to the single he's done?
No.
It does involve him dancing around in some fields with somebody.
With Julie Andrews?
I don't know. No, not with Julie Andrews, but with somebody. And I can't remember which single it was now. But yeah,
right.
One of them has him dancing in the fields with somebody.
Okay, well there you go. I was almost there.
Yeah, you were.
And yeah, I don't kind of get what happened to all the subtlety from the previous album. I remember there being like songs with a lot of space in them, quite quiet songs that would then break into a bit of chaos and drama at the end. But these were just, I just found this a really chaotic album. It was all over the place, and I struggled quite a lot with it, which I don't think either of you are going to have. Well, I can already tell that you didn't. For me, there was two songs that came close to the standard of the last album and I liked, which were Die For You and Alan. I got a lot of enjoyment out of those two songs. I think they were more like what he was good at on the first album, but I just found it so over the top, so overblown.
Right.
So, both tell me. One of you tell. Well, Nick wants to go last.
I want to go last. I know.
Nirmal, tell me how wrong I am.
This is my favorite album of the set that we have. It was.
Something's happened to your taste this week.
Yeah, you know, it's just I think I've come into my own here, and ready to break out from these conformist views that you and both of you, just outrageous.
I'm sorry.
This
Slightly.
album, though, was a lot of, again, really enjoyable for me to listen to, but I thought it was exceptional in terms of what happened in relation to the first album. And so, like, the first album was so heavy and intense.
You mean the last album, don't you, by the way? Because it wasn't his first, incidentally, people listening. It was his third, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
Well,
yeah.
Right. His last album.
Yeah.
So it was really heavy, intense, very political, and beautiful. I thought an incredible, album. But he goes, I think, in a different direction, and it made. I thought it was a real courageous thing to do, because I think he was still successful in what he did, in tapping into different funk kind of sounds and some little bit more poppy sounds, and then returning to the ballads that he's also, I think from the last album, really shown to be excellent at. So I heard, when I was listening to this, I was hearing an homage to like Prince in a lot of ways. I was hearing
interesting.
I was hearing an homage. There are things that resonated from Christine and the Queen, and then I was listening, and I just kind of felt like it was pushing beyond identity politics in some ways, which I was a little concerned that he would be captive to in the last album. So I was impressed both politically and musically by this one.
So I spent a long time thinking about how I would approach this album, both just before I started listening to it and sort of after I'd gone through it a lot. I was very, very concerned, honestly, that I would be swayed by how much I loved the previous album, you know, and that I wouldn't be able to see what was being achieved or what was attempted in this one, you know. So I really struggled with that for a long time. But I think I will say at the end of that process that I think this is really a remarkable piece of work and a really astonishing piece of, just from a production standpoint, as somebody who does that stuff, it's exquisitely engineered. I mean, it's just got some incredible, the way the bass end is so clean, so well defined, like the dynamics in the songs, even from the very first song, works so well. It's kind of amazing to me because Adrian Utley of Portishead produced the last one. I don't think he did this one, but I think some of the stamps that he picked up from that experience, which weren't in his first two albums as much, I don't think, have carried through to this, and that's a very good thing because there were some really interestingly sort of experimental modes he tried to use in this album. So it was genuinely refreshing to hear, even though I knew him and I knew what he had done in the previous album. I felt like it was really it was thrilling. I can say it was a thrilling thing to see somebody push themselves that hard, as you said yourself, Nirmal, and produce such unusual musical shapes with what is basically a keyboard, a bass, and a drum kit and him, and that's it, with, you know, bits of piano and stuff. That's basically it. So it sounded a lot bigger than that, and in that sense I can see what Fran's saying about being, you know, huge and, you know, from his point of view, overblown. But for me that was no problem, because that fitted with the grandiose scope he was trying to engage with, you know. So yeah, I mean, I'm honestly, I sort of felt like maybe you'd not be into this one, Fran. Honestly, I don't know why I've had that sense, but I think after long reflection, I would really do settle that this is a great album. I'll be putting it on vinyl. It's not often I have to buy a new album on vinyl, and I'll be doing that for this one. It was easily my favourite of the five.
Well, I'm glad I went straight in with my negativity, because that was some quite high praise. Don't think it'll be changing my mind, but I've got to say, I think I was gutted that I didn't like this album, because actually, Nick, you bought me the previous album on vinyl for my birthday.
I did,
and I really like that album. Yeah, and that's why I was, I think, quite so can't say the word, angry about
Sounds
this
like
one.
he has to give you this album for your birthday next year. Right?
Yeah, next year.
Yeah, I might be away for that birthday.
He's going away. He's not coming back for that birthday. He's bang on his front door. He won't be answering.
I'd love to love this album, and actually, he's playing in Manchester in November in a really small venue, and I'm still tempted to see him. Because,
really? If you hate it,
because I like the last album so much, but then I think I'd have to listen to that. I'd have to go out while he played that song Reef and bash my head against the wall or something.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll go on my own then.
I'm sorry to put a downer on it, but it just didn't get me.
Well, it's you know, you're very skilled at putting a downer on it, so don't worry.
I've got to say, I think it's one of the first times that I've been the more negative of the three.
Yeah.
But
so can I ask what we thought of the list as a whole then, as to just before we get into national stuff?
Well, should I get the negativity straight in? I thought it was the worst list we've done so far.
Okay.
I only liked one album particularly.
Okay. I would say maybe 2.5 of the 5 I liked, but the ones I didn't like were pretty poor. So it was a mixed bag, definitely a mixed bag, this one. We've had better lists than this one, I would say.
Yeah, I got nothing to say.
Okay,
I think you
that's
loved
really
this
helpful.
list, didn't you, Nirmal?
That's really helpful on a podcast. But you have nothing to say. That's perfect. Okay, so let's talk about the national. We'll give Fran the floor for maybe an hour and a half, and he can talk about how much he loves the national.
Just if it feels like I'm getting stuck.
Right.
Because I just geek out too much about the national and just slap me around the back of the head.
And at the end, Nirmal and I'll just be like, yes. And
yes.
that'll be the end of it.
National. No, I'll try to be reasonably brief. And for those ends, I won't introduce the band too much. I think nowadays most people know who they are.
Yep.
Although when I started listening to them, they were a bit of a cult band. And nobody really knew much about them when I mentioned them, which I kind of liked at the time because it made me feel special.
Yeah.
But I feel a bit less
special.
special
Oh, you are
now,
a special snowflake, no question.
But just in case anybody doesn't know who they are, they're a 5-piece Ohio band with 2 sets of brothers and then their lead singer, Madvillain. Their debut album came out in 2001 and they've got a new one out in September the 8th this year, which I have pre-ordered on vinyl, obviously. So to get us started, I'll just tell you a little bit about how I discovered the band. It's not quite as exciting a story as Nirmal's story about Neutral Milk Hotel and playing on being in the middle of India, or that's a bit more exciting. But for me, it's quite a big deal. So I had a friend. Well, I've still got that friend. He's not dead or anything. But we've still got similar taste in music. But we used to give each other CDs. We'd burn each other CDs, and we'd pass them to each other, and then we'd listen to them all. And I was sat in my bedroom one day in my mum's house. So this is 12 years ago or so. I was playing a game called Football Manager, so anyone who knows what that game is, that will tell you how long ago this was.
Wow.
And I was kind of putting these blank CDs at random into my CD player. It was bands like The Cribs and Block Party and The Rakes, a lot of very indie bands that was my big thing at the time, that and hip-hop. And then I put this album in, and it was kind of... The first song was what we now know as Fake Empire, but all I heard at the time was that amazing little piano beat at the start, and then he comes in with Stay Up Super Late Tonight, picking apples, making pie, put a little something in your lemonade and take it with us. And I was just like, what is this? So I immediately got onto the phone to my friend, and he had no idea what it was. And somehow this album had snuck into this list of burnt CDs that he'd given me. And I spent the first 20, 30 listens, because it was believe it or not, it was kind of before we used to go straight to Google and just Google a lyric. So I spent maybe the first 30 listens just completely clueless to who I was listening to what I was listening to, until eventually I played it to one friend who had actually burnt that CD for my other friend. So it was kind of the first time and the last time that I remember just being so enthralled by an album so quickly and just listened to it on repeat without actually having a clue who I was listening to.
Yeah.
All I kept saying was, who's this dude who sounds a bit like Johnny Cash? Because that's the only comparison I had from the music I listened to then.
Right.
So as well as that being how I first heard them, it's kind of a big deal to me in a way, because it kind of changed a lot about the way I look at music and my tastes. I kind of looked at music in a bit of a different way after that. I kind of looked for a bit more depth in what I was listening to a lot of the time, which sounds cheesy as hell, but it kind of is the case. And now Boxer, that turned out to be the album Boxer, which... I've done a playlist to show you to the National this time to show the listeners, but Boxer itself remains probably my favourite album of all time, alongside In Rainbows by Radiohead. And Slow Show, which is track number 6 on Boxer, is arguably my favourite song of all time. So I'm just going to run through a few things now about why I think this band's so special. There's 3 main points. So one is the way they build a song. Which sounds quite simplistic, but I'm going to compare it to last time when Nick was talking about PJ Harvey, and he talked about how she has a lot of songs that are completely rife with tension, but that tension kind of never breaks, and the songs don't break, and it just remains that tense. Well, I think the National are the exact opposite of that. Like, they build their songs really slowly, and then they kind of crack open, and I think that's equally effective, but they build layer and layer upon the songs, and that's kind of... We get a bit of chaos towards the end, and I think it makes them... A lot of people call them depressing, but I think that factor makes them a really uplifting band to listen to. 2 particular examples on the playlist that I put together of how they build songs like that are a song called England, which is from High Violet, which I put on quite late, just so I can make this point. And then a song called About Today, which is a very early song of theirs, actually, that they then did a fantastic live version of. which I include on the playlist. So that's my first point. My second, I'm just going to say the name Brian Devendorf. In many ways, he would be the quiet man of the band, but the national sound wouldn't exist without them. He's the drummer, and the drums are so crucial to this band. Just on this playlist that I put together, there's songs like Fake Empire, Mr. November, Apartment Story, and Afraid of Everyone, which the drums really bring to life. And for me, that's a big part of why this band managed to be uplifting and energetic while also being quite melancholy. And then finally, and probably the biggest reason I love this band, is the lyrics. Matt Berninger's lyrics are just mind-blowing to me. He manages to be funny, miserly, bitter and brilliant all at the same time, and often in the space of a single verse. So I'm just going to pick out now a couple of my favourite lyrics before I pass over to you guys. So from an emotional perspective, probably my favourite lyric of theirs is in Slow Show, the song which I mentioned earlier. It's a refrain towards the end of the song where he repeats, "You know I dreamed about you for 29 years before I saw you. You know I dreamed about you, I missed you for 29 years. I mean, it's a very simple lyric, but I think it's just such a beautiful way of saying a common sentiment that's in lots of other songs, but in such an original way. And then from a funnier side of things, I love the line which is in This Is the Last Time, where he says, "Oh, don't tell anyone I'm here, I've got Tylenol and beer." I think it's an example of how he's funny and really quite miserable and depressing in one sentence, which is a pretty impressive skill. And now just to go on for a little bit longer, probably for me the best opening verse to a song that I've ever heard, from Baby Will Be Fine, which is off the album Alligator. Well, so it's, "All night I lay on my pillow and pray for my boss to stop me in the hallway, lay my head on his shoulder and say, 'Son, I've been hearing good things.' I wake up without warning and go flying around the house, me and my Sauvignon fierce freaking out. Take a 45-minute shower and kiss the mirror and say, 'Look at me, baby, we'll be fine.'" It's just almost put shivers up my spine. It's just such a clever... It's all about himself. The song's called Baby Will Be Fine. You hear that, you think it's a love song, but it's all about himself and trying to make himself probably not kill himself, but in quite a funny way, which I think is quite magical, really. So I spoke to you both before and asked you if you'd pick out a couple of lyrics. So I thought maybe we could just run through some of the lyrics that you guys chose before you start telling me what you think about the band in general.
Sure, that sounds fine. Nirmal, why don't you jump in actually first?
Yeah, sure. There are a couple lines. I first of all, I kind of agree with what you're saying, Fran, about the lyrics and this being such a captivating piece of this band. I love it so much, and also if you've ever seen them live, just the performance of it as well. It's wonderful. I was always really struck by the line of "I still owe money to the money
Yes,
I owe."
what a line.
I love that line.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And also like the line that goes, "Summer sent a runner for the feeling I was under, for the feeling that I lost today." I think that's the one.
Yeah.
Which is a great sort of sequence. It's just that both of those lines are like interesting rolling sentiments that go on for multiple phrases, and I'm just like, I'm not only impressed by the lyrics, but it's just the melody is so catchy and resonant at the same time as he's singing it. So I think that combination really gets me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go along with the "I still owe money to the money I owe" line. That's always one that gets me every time. It's another one that's just so simple, but there's just something it's so clever about it as well. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And I think lots of what you said I resonate with, Fran, and you too, Nirmal. But I think one thing in particular was the humour, the dark humour. I think that works so well in so many of the songs, and I think they are pretty somber in a lot of occasions, but there's some really nice turns, like that. So the lyric I had in particular was from Apartment Story. Hold ourselves together with our arms around the stereo for hours while it sings itself or whatever it does, while it sings to itself of its long lost loves. I'm getting tired, I'm forgetting why.
Brilliant.
which I also love the half rhyme in that as well on the last two lines. So no, I mean he's clearly a very, very strong writer. I think a lot of these songs could stand without the music lyrically, as poems. I think they could actually work that way. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I also was introduced to the band through Fake Empire, and I think the mode of production of that song as well is, let me say, it's a little bit like Perfume Genius. It's kind of got that very clever, very polished, and also very clever construction that works with so many elements or disparate elements appearing to not fit, and then they ultimately do gel into one, which I think is a genius move. That's the strongest piece of music they've ever done, in my opinion. I suppose if I was to criticise the band, which I don't do readily because I do think they're great, I'd say that there's not as much variety across the albums as there could be, or there is in some other bands. I just feel like if you were to compare it to like a Radiohead, for example, I think there's more variety, even though that's also quite a somber band. This band does something extremely, extremely well, and they keep doing that, and that's a great thing. But to me, it doesn't turn as much as some artists. But anyway, that's a minor thing. It really is.
I mean,
but
I don't think that's a point that I would argue with, but I think they change enough with each album for me. It's a tiny change with each album. There's always something slightly different about the way the production, or there's always some element that changes just slightly, that it's enough. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them actually to change majorly with this new album, and there's talk of a bit more electronic stuff in there, which
I've heard about
will
that,
be interesting. But I hope they don't go too far with it. Personally, I don't want them to become a different band, because for me, they're doing what they do, and they're doing it in an exceptional way that I don't want them to mess with too much.
Yeah.
Even though I do. That's a point that is often made about them, that they don't change it up enough. But
yeah. I mean, maybe it's a question of style. Maybe it's a question of pacing. And the other one observation I was going to make was I think when I say Fake Empire is their strongest song, and that's in keeping with when they really broke, isn't it? When that single came out, that's where they really, And I would say, although the playlist was very interesting to go back through a lot of the earlier stuff, and a lot of it I did like, I think in a way it is reasonable that they broke at that point in a way. In other words, that stuff is when they really turned to another level of ability and skill, which I didn't see as much in the early stuff. I still liked it, but I think it wasn't quite as strong. So yeah, in other words, it wasn't just like they were hidden away with 6 amazing faultless albums and then suddenly they finally got discovered. I feel like they did something remarkable, and they've been kind of credited with that by the success they had later on.
Yeah, in a way. But I mean, Alligator was the album before Boxer, and that was kind of where they started getting a lot more critical acclaim, and then Boxer High Violet is where they really burst out and became a big band. But the album is a well-known thought that Sad Songs for Dirty Lovers and The National, the sort of first 2 albums were weaker albums. I think I picked some of the better songs. I mean, they've got a lot of good songs on them. But,
I mean, every band needs to grow, and and there's not many bands that hit the ground with the first album and do something that's the best thing they do. It's pretty unusual, and that's not even to be sought after, really. I think it's nice to see that growth, because then you can, if you follow them early on, you see that develop and each one is better, or if you don't, you can dig back through and see how they got to where they are, which is all interesting stuff. So So
something to be said there too about National, the quality of the drumming in it. I always find it really infectious and prominent in the music, and kind of the guy just was really talented. I don't know how good he is technically, but he's
very good technically, in my opinion. I'm not a drummer personally, but I listen to a lot of that stuff, and I feel like he's extremely good. He's probably the best technical musician in the band.
Yeah, I mean, the drum seems to pop so much for me.
He is crucial to them. I mean, to say he's the best musician, the Dessner brothers are both sort of classical musicians and stuff as well, which is interesting. There's a lot of talent in that band, but I think he comes to the fore musically just because he's so important to their sound.
Yep.
But yeah, is there any other songs? Was there any songs that you guys hadn't experienced? Because I know you both knew them, but maybe not as much as
I mean, I didn't know as much of the early stuff, definitely not. And as I say, that was intriguing stuff, but not quite as... I wouldn't return to it as much as I would return to the later stuff, basically, But there wasn't any particular track that that jumped out at me out of those early ones I wanted to talk about right now. But Nirmal, what do you think?
I hadn't heard the last couple ones that you put on there. That the more recent ones.
So Exile, Vilify, and System of Dreams in Total Darkness. Yeah, well, the System of Dreams in Total Darkness came out while I was making this playlist. So it was it wouldn't have been there, but then it came out, and I kind of added it on because I had to, because I was listening to it obsessively. So
I would say the one song that I wish, not wish, but the one song that I was like, oh, this one should be on this list is Karen.
Karen, yeah. Karen's a fantastic song. I tried to keep
song.
myself to like 3 songs per album though, and
that's what I do with PJ Harvey, exactly the same. Yeah.
I couldn't not have. Which ones did I have off Alligator? I had Mr. November, Baby Will Be Fine, and one more which I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were sort of 3 of my favourite songs. So it was difficult. Karen's up there for me though. It's a great song.
Great piece.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that kind of brings it to a close, just about, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does.
So let's talk about what's going to happen next time round, and we're going to take a little bit of a break, aren't we, over August?
Yeah,
that's fair to say, isn't it? So because we're all away on holiday and stuff, as probably anybody who's listened to this is as well. So and then we're going to come back straight after that and do another one with the following albums. So yeah.
So for me, it's going to be Marika Hackman's "I'm Not Your Man," and then surprisingly, I picked an album that Bryce Dessner from the Nationals involved in with Sufjan Stevens, James McAllister, and Nico Mooley, and that's called Planetarium.
Okay, I picked Algiers, The Underside of Power, and then Paul Bearer's Heartless, both albums from this year. In fact, Algiers came out about a week ago, I think.
And I'll be introducing Chlor, which is a older album that's a classic, and also putting together a playlist of Leonard Cohen.
All right.
Okay, great. Well, sounds like we're there then. Thanks very much.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.